downstream. The next door neighbor wants his share of it. And there are unexercised water rights that haven't come into play here. Riparian rights is a good example. These are not dormant. They're not being used, but they're not lost. And the minute they start exercising some of those folks that do have storage facilities in these small watersheds, there's going to be a bit of an argument over that. So it's not a real simple answer. And it's not simple to say that, it's the cost that's impaired by a particular applicant. It's the cost to develop the water. We recognize it's a huge cost, and historically, the taxpayer paid for it. They paid for my salary. And they paid for all of those of my staff that approved many of these permits and did all the work for them. That has changed. That's a sign of the times. And currently our staffing is under, like much agencies, we're under the 10% reduction that everybody else is having to accomplish. So I don't have a complete answer for you.
Okay, last speaker card I have is from Ms. Ellen Faulkner.
Yes, thanks you for giving me an opportunity today to ask a question. I have listened carefully as I can to what's been going on here, and I see that the water people, the water board, is primarily responsible for water rights and for making sure that the people downstream from here have enough water to fill their water rights. And if they start using them all, then we'd all be in some sort of trouble. My question has to do with what agency is primarily responsible not for making sure everybody gets enough water for their water rights, but for protecting the fishery, which is a very important local food supply, or used to be. It used to be the richest food supply on the West Coast. It was bar none the best food there was here, and it could still be if we handle things properly. So that's my question. If it isn't the water people here, the water board, who's responsible primarily for protecting the fish and the fisheries, then what agency is? That's my question.
Short answer is the State Water Board does have responsibilities to provide for protection of the fisheries where reasonable in some respects, and also to take into consideration that we don't further the downside of listed species. But the primary agency involved responsible for that is the California Department of Fish and Game. In the case of anadromous fish, it's the National Marine Fisheries Service.
Okay, thank you very much. Any additional public comment? Okay, bring it back to the board at this level then, and comments, questions, direction from the board.
I'd just like to thank these folks for listening to our concerns, and hoping that you'll pass the message on. I think from all levels it's been pretty clear what our concerns are, our basic concerns.
Thank you, John. Supervisor Delaware.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's just a few last comments that some notes I made. One of the speakers asked how we're going to know if all this is going to work. And that's an extremely valid question. You have a monitoring program that you may put in place if you maybe get funding for it, but you're under a 10% cut now, and you don't know if there's ever going to be money for a monitoring program. And the monitoring program is required to know if this thing's going to work, but even with or without the monitoring program, you're not going to know because it's called nature. It's called what goes on in the ocean. It's called the predators. It's called all the other factors that come into play with the number of salmonids. And again, the rockfish and all the other things that don't come inland that are also impacted by nature. Yep. So I don't know if we go through all this, we cause all these hassles and the economic impacts, for what? We'll never know. You mentioned that the board, state board, has the ability to balance the economic impacts against with the policy and the other impacts. The staff ought to have that ability too, because you're going to put together the package, the proposed regulations, the proposed policy to the state board. So that balancing needs to occur with you folks and your staff too, prior to getting to the state board. The you talked about an enforcement problem and all of the unpermitted diversions and illegal diversions. But when we look at a policy such as this proposed one that's so onerous, all we're going to do is create more outlaws. That's what's going to happen. And you don't have the money to deal with that as it is now. Why are we creating more outlaws? And then, what's the unintended consequences? If this process becomes so onerous and so economically unfeasible that the farmer or rancher is no longer able to produce a food or fiber, what's their option? Well, it's subdivision. That 1,000-acre ranch is now broken up into 160s or 40s. Is that really a benefit to the fish and wildlife of the state, to the public trust, public good? It's not. Every time we go through a subdivision or a general plan change, we have to impose this ungodly mitigation fee on behalf of fish and game. We don't even have the option anymore of calling it bogus and waiving it. We have to do it. And so you can see the irony here that if we go through one state agency that creates something that causes a subdivision, then we turn around and got to pay another state agency for the impacts of that subdivision for under the guise of fish and wildlife. You can see the irony. This is land use planning for Mendocino County from Sacramento. And I know it's not you folks individually, and don't, as it was stated many times, my frustration is not directed at you personally, it's directed at this process. We have the water in this county. We get plenty of water in this county. And you and I may disagree on that, but there's plenty of water. The question is storage. And we ought to be encouraging the storage, not discouraging the storage. This policy is dealing with rivers that are going south. What I see is my economy and my environment going south if this goes through, as it is. If you haven't figured out by now where I stand on this, I've done a very poor job of explaining it. But I do want to also thank you for coming over here and listening to not only us up here, but the affected individuals, many of them for many, many years, and tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars are trying to get through a process and do it right. I'm asking that you take this into consideration. Look at all the comments that you're going to get and you have received. Take some more time. Extend the time. Don't be shy of doing that, because this is huge. This is huge to us. We're already struggling here. We don't need any help from Sacramento to struggle some more. Mr. Chairman, I think that's all I've got tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments from the board? Okay, I've got a couple comments, and I'm looking for direction from the board and how to respond to today's input, both from the staff and from the public. And I've written a couple notes here. One is ask for delay in the policy implementation to allow for additional workshops and/or to further study input on the practical implementation of the policy. Request a trial basin watershed project before we go grand with this. Demand a full economic impact study, not a partial one, a full comprehensive study as we would do and be requested of. And the last would be to bring CSAC in to weigh in on this and look for additional input from the other counties.
Well,
Supervisor.
what I would like to see happen is I think they should study it for another year. Or not, so they should postpone it for one more year and then study it for a year and then forget about it. That's what I think they should do.
Trying to formulate my thoughts after that, John.